It often comes as a surprise to new residents that two major rivers, the Salt and the Gila, pass through Phoenix, Arizona. In the dry heat, under blue skies, residents absent-mindedly cross their channels regularly, rarely observing any flowing water. It is easy to forget that both rivers were once perennial. It is easier still to forget the powerful role water has played in shaping both the social and ecological landscapes of this oasis in the desert, although the legacies still pattern our city. Just as the Salt and Gila rivers have played a powerful role in shaping the history and prosperity of Phoenix residents, we have reshaped the river to better reflect prosperity. Increasingly complex infrastructure has facilitated rapid economic and population growth, but we forget that the benefits and burdens of infrastructure are not equitably distributed across the landscape. Living amidst constantly filled lakes, we are forgetting that the rivers are dynamic. Forgetting the consequences of their dynamism because the evidence is washed away in floodwaters. Forgetting the role of water at the periphery as we manufacture water features to focus attention on the core. Forgetting those with aspirations for subsistence who rely on the river's fish to supplement their diet, as we advertise luxury amenities, like lakefront properties, to those looking for a way to supplement their status. Forgetting how old community is lost as we strive to create new community. Forgetting how water naturally flows as we force it to pool. Here we take up the histories of Tempe Town Lake and Allenville, and the language of forgetting to draw attention to the ways in which we have changed the river, by directing our collective gaze toward affluence and its attendant stability, and away from poverty and its attendant acceptance. The story includes the ephemeral Salt and Gila rivers, at two times and places in which the river deviated from its inconsequential identity. In the case of Tempe Town Lake, city planners made a decision to deviate from the dryness and constructed an 89-hectare lake in the Salt River's bed. It was an opportunity for growth in a city bounded by other municipalities and unable to sprawl. In the case of Allenville, Arizona, a historically black community was allowed to reside in the floodplain. After enduring and rebuilding from the ravages of floods for decades, residents were convinced to relocate en masse in 1979. When the Army Corps of Engineers bulldozed the town, residents and government agents imagined that the community would reestablish in Hopeville, Arizona, where many mobile homes had been provided. The spirit of Allenville, however, was never fully recreated.
The metropolitan Phoenix landscape has a deep history of infrastructure and impact. Between AD 600 and 1450, Hohokam communities called on social networks throughout the basin to organize the construction and maintenance of a vast system of irrigation canals. By creating this infrastructure, the Hohokam altered the flow of the Salt and Gila rivers, slowing their pace and spreading their volume across an area much wider than their primary channels. This work maximized the availability of water for agricultural irrigation and markedly changed the landscape and diets of the people living in this arid land. After its modern founding in 1860, Phoenix residents again relied on canals to move and redirect water through the valley. Many of these modern canals followed those cut by the Hohokam. Today, as agricultural demands are waning, water for the Salt River largely supports the population of the fifth largest city in the United States, providing drinking water and electricity, fueling industry, and affording recreational opportunities to residents. Meeting the demands of this booming metropolis has required the construction of additional infrastructure. Anglo settlers have contributed additional feats of engineering, constructing 6 dams between 1911 and 1946 to even out the extreme seasonal and yearly variability of desert hydrology. These mammoth constructions retain infrequent but voluminous floodwaters and assure a steady supply of drinking water. The dams are upstream and outside of the city, their large reservoirs popular with urban residents for boating and fishing, but the connection with our normally dry Salt River is forgotten by today's residents. Within the city, investment in engineering the river and water systems has been geographically uneven. As Phoenix engineered water out of the riverbed itself fell to other uses, becoming the site of at least 63 landfills and numerous gravel pits. Housing development in the floodplain moved toward the riverbed as memories of floods drifted farther away.
Allenville was founded in the 1940s by black migrant workers who were not welcomed in nearby farming community of Buckeye. Pushed from white towns, this community was forced to build their homes in the floodplain of the Salt River with few other options for housing. The community never experienced frequent major flooding until the construction of a water management and conservation project in the desert regions of southern Arizona. Reservoirs located upstream from Allenville, including those along the Salt River, required major water releases during periods of heavy rains and snowmelt in northern Arizona watersheds to avoid the possibility of dam collapse. Since the Salt, Verde, and Agua Fria rivers converge into the Gila River about 15 miles upstream of Allenville, repeated seasonal flooding became inevitable. The first flooding along the Gila River to affect Allenville came on New Year's Eve of 1965. At that time, only a small part of Allenville experienced severe flood damage. Repeated minor floods persisted until 1978. Then, in March and December of 1978, two 500-year floods destroyed Allenville. This time, the entire community was affected. Watermarks as much as 6 feet above ground level were left on some buildings. All residents were evacuated, and while there was no loss of human life, property losses were extensive. Families were evacuated to mobile homes donated by the Flood Control District. Community leaders applied to the federal and state governments for help and were eventually resettled, founding Hopeville, Arizona.
Tempe Town Lake was imagined in the 1960s as an engine for economic growth. After wider adoption of a river restoration plan was voted down in 1987, Tempe made the project its own. In a rapidly growing, sprawling Phoenix metropolitan area, landlocked Tempe needed a way to grow. Tempe Town Lake was created in 1999 as a novel amenity designed to attract wealthy residents and increase tax revenues. In the core of the urban Phoenix, and 2 miles long, the lake is a poster child for urban infrastructure. Both inflatable downstream dams can be lowered in response to rain events, allowing floodwaters to pass seamlessly by lakefront condos without consequence. It is lined with marinas and condos. Standing on the lush, grassy shores of Tempe Town Lake, the river gives us no sense of what came before it. The lake is almost always full, providing residents with a visual reassurance that they will be provided for, even in times of drought. As the lake began to fill, engineers predicted a honeymoon period through which biological processes like increased algae and mosquitoes, which might affect management, public opinion, and the public health, could be monitored. However, monsoonal floods pulsed stormwater into the lake, and soon lake managers began to receive complaints about mosquitoes near the upstream dams. They responded immediately, using pesticides and stocking fish to prevent the potential spread of West Nile virus, and developed plans that limit the habitat available for nuisance and disease-carrying insects in riparian zones above and below the dams. In case of flooding, stormwater from nearby Indian Bend Wash is now diverted around the lake.
Before it was bulldozed, outsiders had trouble seeing anything positive in Allenville. As one Vista volunteer, Harold Hamilton, recalls in 1968, "It was a shanty town with one store, a main street called Broadway with 8 streetlights. We used outhouses, there was no plumbing, we couldn't drink the water." However, life pulsed along in Allenville. There was a pool hall full of locals and teenagers from Buckeye looking for ways around the drinking age. There was a daycare, 3 churches, cafes, a Black History library, an auto shop, and an adult education facility. Newspaper accounts list as many as 800 residents in the late 1960s and 400 in the early 1970s. There was a community. Allenville Citizens for Progress, a nonprofit organization formed in 1965, provided an institutional forum for community members to tap the resources of the larger society in pursuit of improving the quality of life in Allenville.
Tempe Town Lake was spawned as a way to create a waterfront and enliven the city by creating a civic space and reconnecting fractured streets and isolated neighborhoods. Since its creation, visitors to Tempe Town Lake easily identify the amenities provided by the lake. Taking an even more relaxed approach, I walked along the concrete promenade, indulging in a bit of people-watching. A father and his 2 children tried their luck at fishing, and a young couple from India posed for a photo with the Tempe bridges in the background, says Neil Anderson of the Albuquerque Journal.